In recent years, the gaming community has been having a big resurgence of games that identify as non-AAA games. And this is absolutely due to the laundry list of games from big developers who release games that are unfinished, buggy, and downright a slap in the face to the community that purchases and funds these very games. And in an era where the big corporations that once released gems are starting to release worse and worse games, along come the underdogs.
Et tu, Brute?
Now, am I being slightly facetious here? Absolutely. Lethal Company is by no means changing the gaming industry and absolutely evolving it, but one thing that I would like to state is that the release of this game did push a certain section of gaming culture going forward, and that small section is simply co-op games. And what those co-op games turned into was nothing more than an entire genre of games based around the same constant thing: having fun with your friends. The objective of the game didn't necessarily matter as much as the time spent joking around and making hilarious moments with your friend group. Something that seems almost as if it's a lost art nowadays because co-op games generally don't offer that sole purpose anymore like they used to back in the day. And from that one game, we ended up getting things like Content Warning, Lockdown Protocol, Repo, and most recently with Peak and Mage Arena, creating almost a pseudo co-op genre. I say pseudo for a reason, we'll get into that a little later. But naturally, in response to these games releasing, a certain section of the internet was adamant on showing their disdain towards these games being similar in nature. People saw the release of Content Warning, Repo, and other games that have this very similar co-op style and automatically groaned and rolled their eyes at the sight of seeing more games similar to that releasing. And in response to one of the game's main purpose of just relaxing and making moments with your friends, that certain section deemed it fit to simply call these games quote unquote Friendslop. How y'all doing today? I'm EsZeya and I'm just some random brown-skinned dude on the internet that likes to talk about video games. And I wanted to talk about our love and also hate of these new co-op games that are popping up out of nowhere in the gaming industry. Now, I definitely wanted to make this video for a long time, specifically ever since Lethal Company did come out, but one of the main reasons why I didn't was because I always felt that the genre in itself was underdeveloped. There was not a lot of games that could actually fit into what people would be calling that Friendslop genre. Fast forward 2 years later, all of a sudden, we got plenty of games to talk about now. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. The first one being why the term Friendslop isn't necessarily a good term and it doesn't necessarily fit. And second of all, why we like these games so much in the first place. So before we can do anything, we have to basically look at the history and what it means to be a Friendslop game. The first time I heard the term Friendslop, it was actually used on a tweet made this year in March, essentially saying that, I don't know how else to describe it, but I want to call this genre of game Friendslop. Its sole purpose of existence is friend farming. Now, naturally, when this tweet came out, many people were up in arms, essentially calling the term Friendslop in the first place just kind of weird and out of place. Myself included, I will state that I've always and still am a big hater against the word like slop. I think it's simply just a nonsensical adjective that people just kind of label things as. People who use it often just throw the terminology around to describe something as bad without taking the time and energy to learn whether or not that thing is bad. It's a whole thing, but I do not like the term slop. But as time went on and more board games started making similar gameplay loops, the term began to gain traction within certain sections of the gaming community. People were up in arms at these rather simplistic games that were made almost all by indie developers whose main draw is simply enjoying time with your friends were topping the charts on Steam, Twitch, and all of social media. You cannot turn anywhere without seeing some type of Friendslop nowadays inside of the gaming community. Still to this day, there are people who hear a game is releasing that has indie vibes and is a co-op game and then immediately roll their eyes and groan like they always have. And one thing that I wanted to do is try and find out why people have such a disregard for these games within the co-op genre that they hate, and not other games within the gaming community that follow similar concepts, if not identical concepts, but they love. And when the term Friendslop essentially first came out, what I found from people on the internet describing what a Friendslop was is that people didn't know what a Friendslop was. Goes back to the reason I don't like the term slop in the first place is because it almost kind of nullifies having to dissect anything within the video game. And that's something that a lot of the people that threw around the term Friendslop did. People were describing games as Friendslop games without actually understanding what constituted a game to be a Friendslop game. That went on for a while, and then this photo surfaced, essentially trying to make a distinction between what is a friend like and a Friendslop. which are terms that I never thought I'd hear in the gaming community, but here we are. But what this photo is trying to say is that Friendslop games are simply games that cater towards content creators, and where winning simply means that you do another round. Friend-like games are where the gameplay is the focus, and it describes most online games. And while I don't entirely disagree with some of these descriptions on this photo, which we will get into later inside of the video, I'd like to offer some pushback on a few parts of this photo, if not most of the parts of this photo. The first one being that the gameplay of Friendslop games are secondary to that of playing with your friends. The mechanics and gameplay loop of Friendslop games do not matter as much as the fact that you're playing with your friends. Now, do not get me wrong. Are these games more fun when you play with your friends? Absolutely. But I argue most games are fun when you play them with your friends. That's the point of co-op games. And to make the argument that these co-op games offer little to no gameplay outside of playing with your friends is just not true at all. Take a game like Repo, for example. In this game, you take on the role of a robot to go in and collect loot inside of arenas full of monsters, traps, and puzzles, and the goal is to gather as much of said loot as possible and take it from one checkpoint to another without dying. The more loot you get equals the more money you get, and the more money you get equals the more upgrades and weapons you can buy to progress through these regions faster and more efficiently. The gameplay loop is actually pretty fun when you get into the flow of things, and it almost reminds me of something of that like an extraction shooter, for example, where you're constantly having to make it through these levels alive. Now, a rebuttal somebody might say towards the argument that I just said is that, well, extraction shooters are PvP and there's more layers towards the gameplay other than just extracting the loot. And I'd say, yes, that's true. However, that doesn't disprove anything, because let's look at the game Outlast, for example. A game where you play as a man who enters an insane asylum, and the goal is to use your camera to traverse through said insane asylum full of monsters, traps, and puzzles, and make it from one checkpoint to another. All of a sudden, these games have identical gameplay loops. Repo actually has more gameplay features to offer than Outlast, with its skill upgrades, combat with weapons, and variety of monsters and maps. Mind you, everything that I just said happens before I invite any of my friends into the game. So the gameplay is the core mechanic within this game, not the multiplayer. Just because the game was made with multiplayer in mind does not mean that the said game is worse because of it. But that line inside of that photo is still not one of the most incorrect things that I've seen inside of that description. The main thing that I wanted to point out is the very first thing listed in what constituted the game as Friendslop, and that was the statement that winning a round just means you get to play another round. And the reason I wanted to bring this specific line up is because this statement is so broad and really does show that the very games that these people are complaining about and are upset about can really be labeled anything, because by this definition that they're giving, this game, this game, this game, and this game are all Friendslops. As a matter of fact, this entire genre of gaming is simply nothing more than gaming moments that are meant to engage from streamers. Even in massive hits like Elden Ring Night Ring that just came out this year, you want to know what happens when you beat a boss inside of that game? You simply get to beat another boss. Or in other words, when you win a round, you just go win another round. Jokes aside, one big distinction that I want to make with these co-op games that some people are not understanding is something that I've already hinted towards a couple times throughout this entire video. And it's simply that the gameplay loop from these games are heavily inspired by roguelikes and roguelites. Now, am I looking at you in your face and am I saying that Content Warning has the same level of gameplay elements as a game like Risk of Rain? No. I'm not. But what I am telling you that the concept of starting a level, collecting loot inside of that level to get stronger, and then continuously doing that until you get to the final stage of said round, that's not a new concept, nor is it a concept specifically made to engage with the streamers and create content to go viral on the internet. This is not a new concept seen to strictly just these co-op games that they just have monopolized and constantly just keep running with. Roguelikes are an extremely popular genre, and the gameplay loop itself is also extremely popular. And realistically speaking, most roguelikes do not have an end goal in mind. It's simply seeing about how far you can go inside of the game and how well you can do within it, depending on which abilities and skills that you have selected at that time. Simply put, it might just be that roguelike gameplay just probably isn't something that you like, and that's completely fine. Another negative comment that I've seen people use against these games is with the price. Now, me personally, I feel like AA games, as well as smaller indie titles, are exactly what the gaming community community kind of needs right now more than ever in the past. But some people do seem to think that the price of this game is specifically set to make it to where these games are similar to that of a get in and get out type of method. In other words, these games are meant to take your money, you play it a couple times, then you never play it again. And to that, I have a few responses. The first one being the most obvious, that's literally how games work. There's not a single game on this planet where the entire marketing strategy is not for you to buy something or the game itself, and then later on get something else or an entirely new game. That's just how marketing works within the gaming community. Even games like Fortnite, where it's arguably going to be one of the most longest lasting games in existence, people are meant to play that game, drop it after a little bit, then eventually come back because of a new collab or something that they've added into the game. The entire point of marketing within the gaming community is quite literally buy something, drop it for a little bit, here's another thing for you guys to come back. That's how this works. And on top of that, you need to understand that most games usually have sequels in mind or successors that actually are meant to make you play this one, stop playing, and now play this one. This is not a new concept within the gaming industry. But let's take a look at it through a different lens and actually show real world examples regarding everything that I just said. Every single gaming quarter, the top games on both Xbox, PlayStation, and as well some on Steam are almost always Call of Duty, FIFA, 2K, either Madden or NBA. These games that are topping the charts consistently every single year are quite literally games that release new versions every single year. So my question is, why is it acceptable for games like Call of Duty, FIFA, and 2K to release new versions every single year that cost $70, which are nothing more than get in, get out cash methods similar to the ones that you guys are saying that you don't like, and not a well-developed $5 to $10 indie game that's doing the same exact strategy as these big corporations on the other side? Also, just to add on to the discussion that we were just saying, when these games are released, they are not just left out to rot once the game is actually released. They are actually receiving constant updates. It's just slower than AAA titles. Take a look at a game like Lethal Company, for example, the game that arguably snowballed everything to create this genre. It just released an update several months ago, revamping the entire game, adding new monsters, features, mechanics to learn within said game. I think the main stigma that these games are considered left behind comes from the fact that most people who interact within the gaming culture only really interact with AAA titles. The problem with that is that these AAA titles all bank on the fact that the person is going to continuously play their game for as long as possible. It is a cash grab. That's how AAA titles usually work nowadays. And with that being said, the updates are usually consistent. The thing about games like Lethal Company, Content Warning, Repo is that these companies are small. Either individual people like Lethal Company or small development studios like Aggro Crab with Peak, for example. They are simply just small studios or individual people releasing updates for their game. It's not going to be as fast as something, say, as a Call of Duty. And I think the main drama comes from the fact that most people don't understand that AA or indie titles often don't get updated that much, if at all. Take a look at a game like Expedition 33, for example, the front runner for Game of the Year. It is a AA game that has openly been stated by the developers is not going to be receiving any more updates, it's not going to be receiving any more DLC, and it's not going to be given a sequel. That is what a AA studio does. And in the case of these small co-op games, the gameplay is there to entertain you until that small development group can find more ways to entertain you. That's how these updates work. It just takes a decent amount of time now because there's only a few people working on these updates. So I feel like people just need to kind of change their mindset when it comes to what these games have to offer. These small... Dude, was that necessary? Say hi to homeboy. Look at him. Hey. Now, I do realize I spent the entire time of this video so far kind of talking about definitions and technicalities and stuff like that. But one thing that I also wanted to ask, like I said in the beginning of the video, was why we like these games so much in the first place. Because no matter how much hate these games receive, at the end of the day, everyone is still playing them. Now, personally, when I first played Lethal Company, I will admit I had a very similar mindset to a lot of people out there. It was one of those games that I personally felt like I was only going to play once with my friends and never touch again, but less because of the gameplay and more because my friends had a habit of convincing me to play games that we never play again. Has nothing to do with the fact that it's an indie game, but that's one of the reasons I didn't play the game until I did. and then everything changed after that. And I think it's for a few reasons. And one of the main reasons being, and I may be biased here seeing is how I've been asking about this, and for this to happen inside the gaming industry for an extremely long time now, the games are cheaper. And cheaper not as in quality, cheaper as in strictly in price. The games don't cost as much. I have been a big advocate for games lowering their prices and kind of converting back to that AA style of game development instead of this large gargantuan AAA style that we seemingly have kind of let get out of control nowadays within the gaming industry. Often making games for nearly a decade for the sake of size and scale. I don't want every single game to be like that. As a matter of fact, I want most games to not be like that. Sometimes I simply just want a small and complete game that I can go turn on and have fun with. And I think with the rise of AA games like Expedition 33, KCD2, and Split Fiction, as well as pretty much every other highest rated game of this year, combined with these co-op games, I imagine that we're going to be seeing more of these types of games going forward, which to me brings me some solace, seeing as how, once again, I've been a big advocate for this type of game to come back for an extremely long time. $70, 10 years to develop a game. Come on now, guys. Let's lower it down, please. And second, and the most obvious one, is that gaming at its core, no matter what people want to say, is a private hobby while also being a social one. If somebody that you knew within your family or friends had a game that you personally didn't have, you would go over to their house to go and play it. Me and my brothers loved playing split screen, either on James Bond, Halo, whatever you want to say, just so that we could play with each other back in the day. Gaming in its core is a social hobby. There's entire arcades dedicated to people going and just having fun with each other, either if they're playing games like Mortal Kombat, Tekken, Street Fighter, racing games. Entire places dedicated to people who like games going to go play games with each other. No matter what we do, we like playing games with friends. And at the end of the day, most games were made with the concept of playing with another person, either literally physically playing with them or talking about it outside of the video game in the first place. In short, most games were made with the intention of being Friendslop games. And I think in an era where most games are released being buggy, overpriced, and void of any soul inside of it, we need more games where the entire purpose is to simply just have fun. So before you use a derogatory connotation to describe these games, or you just kind of label them as streamer games to collect content, take a look at what it's doing for the gaming industry, because it is actually doing a lot and it is pushing a lot of stuff forward, not just for entertainment, but for the culture as a whole. I've been EsZeya, and that's my rant and yap about Friendslop games. Let me know what y'all think inside of the comments. Do you guys like Friendslop games? Which one are you playing right now? Or do you hate them? Do you disagree with everything I said inside of this video? Let me know. Either way, I am EsZeya, and I'm out of here. Peace.